Good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar run by Southern and Tropical Beef Technology Services. My name is Philip Mann and I am a Technical Officer with TBTS based out of Rockhampton. Joining me is Andrew Byrne, who is a Technical Officer with SBTS based in Armidale, and Andrew will be your main presenter tonight. Tonight's webinar is Understanding and Recording Information for the Carcass Traits, and is the fourth in the webinar course titled Breedplan from Go to Woe. Over the next 2 weeks we'll be covering the understanding and recording information for the fertility and docility traits, and then looking at some of the newer EBVs that are available and how DNA information can be incorporated into Breedplan. As with our previous webinars, Andrew will be talking you through the presentation that will come up on your screen. We encourage you to submit any questions that you may have related to tonight's topic by typing your question into the questions field, which is located toward the bottom of the control panel on the right hand side of your screen. Once you have entered your question, just simply click on the send button and that will come through to us. We will be breaking periodically through the presentation to try and answer some or hopefully all of your questions that you send through to us. If your question box should disappear at some stage, just click the double arrows at the top left hand side of your control panel and it will come back hopefully. With that, I'll hand over to Andrew to take you through tonight's topic on carcass traits.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip, and welcome everybody tonight. It's good to see we've got another good lot of people in, so well attended again. What we'll be doing tonight is going through and discussing the carcass traits, as Philip pointed out. So we'll follow a similar format to previous weeks. We'll go through and just discuss the different EBVs relating to the carcass traits. So we'll discuss the eye muscle area EBV, the rib and rump fat, depth EBVs, intramuscular fat, retail beef yield and carcass weight. We'll then break for questions regarding the interpretation of those EBVs, and then come back and discuss in the later session the information that you need to collect should you wish to have these EBVs reporting on your animals, and some of the considerations you need to make when you record this information. So as Philip said, I would encourage you to ask questions as we go along, and we'll break periodically to answer those. So the first EBV that we have tonight is the eye muscle area EBV. So as the name suggests, it's giving us differences between animals in the size of the eye muscle between the 12th and the 13th rib in a standard 300 kilo steer carcass. So when we're talking about the eye muscle area, as is demonstrated down here in this picture, you can obviously see we've got the area of the muscle there between the 12th and the 13th rib, and the eye muscle area is giving us an EBV of any genetic differences that may exist between animals in a standard carcass weight. And that's a very important point. It's not giving us differences in eye muscle area at a standard age. Obviously some animals will have a larger eye muscle at a constant age, if you like, or at a certain age point due to differences in their growth genetics. What the EBV is doing is taking any differences in the growth genetics out of the equation just to give us any differences in eye muscle at a standard carcass weight. And that way we're getting an EBV relating to kind of carcass composition, and more particularly to their muscling, their degree of muscling. The EBV itself is expressed in square centimetres, so that's the units, with larger, more positive eye muscle area EBVs, so higher eye muscle area EBVs being associated with an increase in the square centimetres of eye muscle, and hence greater muscle expression. So that there is the eye muscle area EBV. The next two EBVs which we have the rib and the rump fat EBVs. I've put those on the one slide as they're very similar EBVs, just different points of measurement on the carcass. So again, we've got the rib and the rump fat EBVs are giving us differences or genetic differences between animals in fat depth in terms of the rib between the 12th and the 13th rib, and on the rump EBV at the P8 rump site. Again, differences in a standard 300 kilo steer carcass. So again, the picture below down there shows you, I guess, the fat depth at the 12th or 13th rib, and then you show you exactly what measurement this EBV is referring to. The fat EBVs are all expressed in millimetres, so that's the units, with animals with high or larger, more positive fat EBVs indicating a greater amount of fat at either the rib or the rump fat site, and therefore likely those animals will likely produce progeny which themselves will have more fat if we're looking at a standard weight steer carcass, and the other way of looking at that is if they're putting down the fat, they may also be more early maturing than animals with lower or negative fat EBVs. Obviously there's a fairly high correlation between the rib and the rump fat EBVs. Those animals that have higher rib fat EBVs are also likely to have higher rump fat EBVs. You don't tend to get much re-ranking in those EBVs. However, there are some animals which don't follow the kind of that relationship, and so we have the two different EBVs giving you differences in fat depth at the rump and also the rib. We'll move to the fourth EBV that we'll talk about tonight, the intramuscular fat EBV. So we have intramuscular fat, or the other name we can often refer to it is as marbling. So the intramuscular fat is giving you any differences between animals in the intramuscular fat percentage, the amount of intramuscular fat in the eye muscle between the 12th and the 13th rib, again expresses differences in a standard 300 kilo carcass. So the EBV is expressed in percentage of intramuscular fat, with larger or higher IMF EBVs being associated with greater amounts of intramuscular fat and therefore higher marbling expression in the carcasses of the progeny. Just to explain that the slight difference there between intramuscular fat and marbling, if we look at the diagram down below, we've obviously got the different marble scores. Now the marbling scores are a visual kind of score of the amount of intramuscular fat within the visual marbling that you see, visual amount of fat that you'll see there within the eye muscle. So that the marbling is the visual score. The actual intramuscular fat, which the EBV refers to, is when we actually go and extract that fat out of it and measure what percentage it is, so using some chemical extraction to extract the actual fat out of the muscle and measure that as a percentage. So very similar measurements, but just looking at slightly different traits, but obviously we're getting at the same thing. If we go through the next EBV which we may have here is the Carcass Weight EBV. So the Carcass Weight EBV is giving us differences between animals in hot standard carcass weight at 650 days of age. So while those first EBVs were relating to differences in carcass composition at a standard carcass weight, or a standard carcass weight, these carcass weight EBVs are giving us differences in dressed carcass weight at the standard age, 650 days of age. They're expressed in kilograms, with the higher EBVs indicating a higher standard carcass weight and therefore heavier carcasses. So you can see there in the picture, obviously it's the carcasses hanging up there in the works. They've been split, but you're looking at basically the combination of those two. The sixth EBV we have is the retail beef yield EBV, so it's moving along. Again, we're back in at differences in a standard steer carcass here. This is looking at differences between animals in boned out retail beef yield from a standard 300 kilo carcass. So when we take a 300 kilo dressed carcass, go out, bone that animal, that carcass out, and actually weigh the amount of saleable meat which we have left, then that's what we're talking about with the retail beef yield. So it's expressed as, this EBV is expressed as differences in the percentage of yield, with animals with larger or higher retail beef yield EBVs expected to yield a higher percentage of saleable beef from a standard 300 kilo carcass than animals with the lower retail beef yield EBVs. So that there is the 6 different EBVs we have relating to the carcass traits. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of those. I think we've got a few questions which have come in. We'll throw that over to Philip now to go through those questions.
Yeah, thanks Andrew. I've got a couple of questions here. First one there is why are the carcass EBVs, trait EBVs, why are they adjusted to a steer carcass weight and not to a heifer carcass?
I think think the question there, the answer we're looking at is that the steer carcass weight and the heifer carcass weight, I think, will be very highly correlated, so that the difference between the two, it's just how those differences are expressed. You would expect the same relationship to hold up in the heifer carcasses, and I guess why it's in a steer carcass is that's generally when we look at these traits, the economically important traits, because we're selling the steers or the steer progeny and generally retaining the heifers for breeding. So I suggest that that's why it's a steer and not a heifer carcass. However, the relationship there would be very high.
Right, thanks, Andrew. Another question there we have is if you have an IMF, if you measure an IMF, if you get a measurement of 5 for an animal, how is it possible that it can come back as an EBV of 0?
Okay, it's a very good question. What I guess the measurement of 5 is giving you is a combination of the animal's genetics plus the environment in which you're being run. So the phenotype there is a combination of both genetic and non-genetic factors. The EBV which you're getting is just an estimate of the actual genetic component of that intramuscular fat measurement. So that's where Breedplan will go through, remove any differences there, or the component of that measurement that is due to non-genetic effects, and then just give you a ranking of the actual animal's genetic component. So I guess the way to look at that is the EBVs are giving you differences between animals. So it's not saying in the progeny you're going to get 0% intramuscular fat. However, it's just giving you the differences between animals. So if you had an IMF EBV of +1 on an animal and an IMF EBV of 0, we'd expect in any particular situation that there would be 0.5% IMF difference in the progeny from those two animals, and that may be that they average 5 and 4.5 or 4 and 3.5. So hopefully that answers that. I'm not sure if you've got anything to add to that, Philip.
No, I think that's answered very well, Andrew. Just another question we have there is in relation to the EMA, the eye muscle area EBVs, being related to a standard carcass weight. Does the differences in dressing percentages between animals have any effect on the calculation of that EBV?
Okay, I just need to ponder that question just for a moment. Phil, can you just clarify that question for me?
Yeah, it's just asking if in relation to the eye muscle area EBVs, with them being related back to a standard carcass weight, do the differences in dressing percentages affect its calculations? The example has been given there, like 2 animals, one weighs 600 kilograms, one weighs 550 kilograms, the same EMA and same carcass weight.
Okay, I'm just looking at that one. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm just trying to think through it. So unless you've got something to add, we might need to move on, Philip, and I might have to think about that and come back to it if that's all right.
Rightio. There's another one there about the retail beef yield. I think you're going to cover that one later. In relation to retail beef yield, is offal considered as retail beef? If not, why not?
Again, I'm not actually sure of that answer. It's a good question. One of the difficulties with retail beef yield, which we'll get to in the next little session, is how do we measure it? And there's very few measurements actually being collected at the moment. It was collected originally in the first CRC project. How they actually measure it and whether offal's included, I must have to say I'll plead ignorance because I'm not 100% sure of that. I suspect possibly not.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Andrew. I think there's a few other questions coming in there, but we might just move on. I think some of them will probably be covered as you go through the rest of your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Philip, and I will endeavour to come back to that question at the end. Hopefully I got a bit of chance to think about that one that I didn't answer. So where we may move to now is for those carcass EBVs, what information can you record as a seed stock producer to generate that information on your animals? And there are probably 2 major sources of information which you can collect, and we'll discuss those. The first one is, and the main one, if you're interested in having this information or these EBVs available in animals, is through the collection of live animal ultrasound scan records. So here is a case, as the picture down below demonstrates, where you'll get there's a number of accredited scanners around, so a number of ultrasound technicians that will come around and actually collect scan images or images of the carcass attributes of your animals live using kind of ultrasound technology, which is similar to the ultrasound technology which you may be familiar with that was used on humans. So they'll come along. Animals are generally recorded between 300 to 800 days of age, but we'll have a bit of a discussion in the next slide as to when you should record your animals. But basically the scanner will come around, he'll measure, as you can see there in that picture, the eye muscle area between the 12th and 13th rib, the fat depth there, also the intramuscular fat, and you'll also measure the fat depth on the rump site. So you'll take those measurements and you'll send that into Breedplan, and that way we'll have all your animals all run as a mob, all with their carcass measurements, and that will provide probably the best information for Breedplan. So that's the first set of information that goes into calculating those EBVs on animals, and we'll discuss some of the considerations you need to make when recording that information in the next slide. The other bit of information which can feed into calculating these EBVs is actual abattoir carcass feedback. Now, in practice, unless the feedback is coming through probably structured progeny trials, then it may not be as useful for the genetic evaluation as the scanning information. Obviously the carcass feedback is actually going in and directly measuring the traits of interest, so it is in theory the best possible information we can collect, but there are a number of problems that can occur with that information which can limit its effectiveness for genetic evaluation purposes. Just to give you a bit of an idea as to some of those, obviously if you've got harvesting of animals, so as we've discussed in some of the previous webinars, Breedplan relies on kind of a whole mob of contemporaries, so a whole mob of animals going through, all being killed on the same day, to give really valid comparisons between those animals that have all had the same opportunity to perform. If you've got the situation where you've got a mob of steers, they're all being sent off when they're hitting market specs, so you might be taking the top off them, sending them in, sending the main load in later and the tail in, or not even the tail's not even going in, it's going somewhere else, then you get kind of biased in the data, and it can give you misleading results in terms of the Breedplan analysis. There's also been problems in the past with the actual accuracy of some of that abattoir data, unless there's been a fair bit of active kind of participation in collecting that data, so things like the tags getting mucked up with the carcasses, maybe a change in shift in the abattoir and different people measuring the traits and those type of things. So my recommendation really to seed stock producers is, if you're interested in having the carcass EBVs calculated on your animals, then I'd be focusing on collecting your ultrasound scans, your live animal ultrasound scans, and however, the carcass information is still useful, so if you're really keen on that, then I'd be contacting your SPTS and TBTS technical officer to really discuss how you can go about that to see whether you can get meaningful information. At the moment, the main amount of information which is going into there is through structured progeny trials. Many are being run by the different breed societies. I guess one of the, a regulation which was just passed by the Angus Society of Australia along this lines was to now only accept abattoir carcass information into their genetic evaluation if it had come out of structured progeny tests. So they weren't going to accept any day-to-day industry data, simply because in the past they have had problems with that. So they're the two bits of information which will feed into that. As I said, I would recommend that you really focus your attention on that ultrasound scan data. So to collect that ultrasound scan data, what are some of the considerations that you need to make? The first thing is that scanning information needs to be collected by a Breedplan accredited scanners. So there's a number of Breedplan accredited scanners. A list of those are available on the Breedplan website. To become accredited, effectively every 3 years they're required to pass a test where there's around 30 animals that they come in, they scan those animals, they have to scan them twice, so at different times throughout the day, and the animals aren't identified with a tag or anything, so they can't pick up on which are the same animals. They have to scan them twice and they get tested for repeatability. Those same animals are then sent off to the abattoir, the carcass measurements collected, and it looks at the correlation between, or the relationship between the scan measurements and the carcass measurements when collected in the abattoir. So the scanners have to meet certain requirements to maintain their accreditation. So that the first thing is not everyone can just collect that information. It must be done by an accredited scanner, and there's a list of those on the Breedplan website. The next question probably is, what animals do you scan? Really, it's a bit like all the other performance information we've got. The more animals that you scan, the more information that will be provided to the genetic evaluation, and the higher the accuracy or the reliability of your carcass EBVs. In a perfect world, actually, the best animals to scan would be your heifers. So the heifers tend to show up differences, particularly in the fat and the IMF, the intramuscular fat kind of traits a bit better, and they tend to express those traits a bit earlier, so that they're easier to show up. So in a perfect world, if you had to ask that question from a genetic evaluation point of view, then scanning your heifers adds really valuable data. More reality, what happens in practice is people tend to, I suppose, scan the scale bulls, their sale bulls first of all, because they're the bulls which they're really interested in having the EBVs on. Then they'll go out and scan all their bulls. So obviously one of the limitations with just scanning your sale bulls is that you can get some data bias if they're not a true reflection of the whole drop of bulls. So I guess my recommendation is scan as many animals as possible. Certainly do, if not just your sale bulls, scan all your bulls, and then ideally scan your heifers as well. But there is a cost associated with scanning, so that the ultrasound scanners, I think, will charge you around $12 to $15 an animal, is generally about the going rate, plus potentially a visit fee. So it's not cheap to record these measurements, so you do have to weigh up your cost benefit. The next question there probably is, when do you scan, at what time? The best time to scan really probably depends on the traits which you're particularly interested in. What I will say is your Breedplan will only accept one scanning measurement at the moment, so it's important to make sure that if you're spending the money, you ensure that the scanning, or when you do your scanning, that the animals are at the right stage to make sure that you're getting effective information. Now, for eye muscle area, it's not a great deal of difference between whether you scan at 300 or 800 days in the differences or the different effectiveness of that information. So anywhere between that 300 and 800 days will be fine for the eye muscle area generally. For the fat depths, and that's probably the rib and the rump fat, really was one of the major considerations you need to make. The animals need to be in reasonable condition. So if the animals are all extremely lean, then we don't get much fat depth at the rib and the rump, and so we don't get much variation in those measurements for the purposes of genetic evaluation. So, and this can be a particular issue if people are trying to scan bulls as yearlings, when they may just not be starting to lay down too much fat at that stage. So the recommendation is a minimum of 4 to 5 mils on the rump is adequate. Generally, if you've got animals in reasonable condition, then you'd be looking at scanning them at the time of year that they are in good nick, and therefore you'll be guaranteed you'll get useful information. Most of the scanners will be fairly good at being able to help you as to, in your area, when's the best time to scan, and they'll also, if they come out and you haven't got adequate fat cover, they'll let you know that, and you can work with them as to when a better time to scan is. For intramuscular fat, obviously animals tend to lay fat down later rather than earlier, the intramuscular fat and the marbling down later rather than earlier, so probably delaying your scanning more towards the 600 days than the 400 days may get you better information regarding the intramuscular fat. it is important that you do, or there is some intramuscular fat there in amongst the mob to actually get the differences. So the scanning equipment gets the best results, or ranks animals best, when they're between about 2 to 7% intramuscular fat. At the extremely low levels and also the extremely high levels, the current technology which we've got doesn't show up the differences that well, or is a bit more limited than in an optimum range. So it again, would be talking to your scanner about the best time to collect that intramuscular fat. But obviously, while all the different traits may have different or slightly different requirements, you are taking all those measurements on the one day. So people tend to tie them around either the 400 or the 600 days on animals. If you're just after, or mainly interested in eye muscle area, probably 400 days, then versus the fats more around the 600-day measurements. As with the weight traits that we discussed last week, it is important to record management groups. So really you need to act as the eyes of the analysis and identify any animals or groups of animals which have been treated differently prior to scanning, so that Breedplan will only directly compare the animals which you've placed in the same management group together, and really they are the animals which have all had the same opportunity to perform. So we discussed that a little bit last week. There is more information on the Breedplan website, but it is imperative that you record management groups with your scan information, as with any of your other information, to ensure that Breedplan is making the right comparisons and you're getting a valid genetic evaluation. So if you have any questions about the management groups, please contact your staff at SBTS or TBTS to discuss that. One of the other considerations is whether you need to take a weight on the same day as scanning. It is not compulsory to actually weigh your animals on the day of scanning, but it will help your genetic evaluation and obtain more effective results if you do weigh the animals. Really, I would be trying to tie your scanning in with your 400-day weighing or your 600-day weighing as much, just to minimise your management costs. So it's not compulsory to take a weight, however it is recommended to take a weight on the same day as scanning. This question is how do I collect information for carcass weight and the retail beef yield EBVs? We had a lot of questions come in which probably touched on this. At this stage, you are very limited in how you can actually collect information regarding retail beef yield and carcass weight. The direct measurements of these are not measured by the live animal ultrasound scanning, but as I said in the previous discussion, they are through the abattoir measurements. In terms of carcass weight, as we identified, there are some issues in actually getting that information that's effective for genetic evaluation. In terms of retail beef yield, I'm not aware of any abattoirs which are actually going through and boning out the carcasses and giving you a measurement of saleable meat yield. So you, at this stage, can't collect that information directly, and the EBVs that you have all relate to the actual correlations between traits. So they all look at the actual measurements that you've taken for the genetics of the animals for eye muscle area, fat depth, and basically those two, and also weight, and calculate the carcass weight EBVs and the retail beef yield EBVs off those known relationships based on the information when that data was collected. So carcass weight, there will be a fairly high correlation there with the actual live weight EBVs, and retail beef yield, there will be a fair correlation there with any differences in eye muscle area versus fat depth. So they're just some of the considerations which we've got when selecting this information. I'll just finish up by saying, once you've collected this information, how do you submit it to Breedplan? Like we discussed in previous webinars, there are 4 different ways that you can send it in. So you can send it in on paper. There are 2 different ways that you can go about that. There is actually a paper form which Breedplan can send you out if you'd like to do it that way. The main way that people are doing is sending it in, I guess, on the scanning sheets. So the sheets which, with the feedback that the scanners will give you, are perfectly adequate for Breedplan, as long as you identify on there that the full breed society identifier of the animal, and also any management group information. Then you can just send in that actual scan sheet or a copy of that scan sheet that the ultrasound scanner provides you. Yeah, there are also a number of electronic options. So if you're entering the information into your herd recording program, such as Herdmaster, Stockbook, or CattleLink, you can then extract the information out of there and email that off to Breedplan. There's also the standard Microsoft Excel template, which is available on the Breedplan website. It has the different columns in it for the live animal ultrasound scanning information. And there's also the Internet Solution Submission Facility. So the same facility that you can do your EBV searches and animal searches on through your breed society. Also has a designated area. You can get a member login and password, log into there and actually submit your performance information. Now that really is for the scanning information. If you've actually got abattoir carcass information, then I'll discuss Breedplan and work out which is the best way of getting that in there. There's probably a number of different options, both electronic and possibly just sending in the abattoir feedback which you've got. So that covers, I think, my considerations as to what information you need to collect for the Carcass EBVs and also how to submit that. So I think we've got a range of questions which have come in. I might throw back to you, Philip, to go through those.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we've got quite a few questions coming in there. We talked about the scanning information. It's better to get that information on as many cattle as possible, both your males and females. A couple of the questions there are related to the female portion. If you measure them and they are in calf, can we do that?
You can if they're in calf. The recording information, obviously, we talked about last week, if they're more to about 3 to 4 months in calf, can have an effect on their weights. In terms of the scan information, it's been shown that really it doesn't have too much impact on their actual carcass attributes, so you can almost collect that scan information right up until the point of calving. I think the official recommendation is no more than about 8 months in calf, but really up until about the point of calving with their first calf, you can collect that information.
Right, thanks, Andrew. There's another question there just in relation to any point in scanning cows, which is along the same lines, but I guess that age limit on the cows is of 800 days is the limiting factor with regards to that.
Correct. At this stage, no information on the mature cows is feeding into the analysis. As an aside, however, there is an industry project at the moment being conducted by the Beef CRC where they are collecting carcass measurements on the mature cow herd. So they're collecting animals either pre and post calving up until their second calf, and that's really trying to evaluate any differences which may exist in carcass composition. I suppose if we're selecting at yearlings and how that relates to carcass composition within the mature cow herd, particularly the fat depths and its impact on fertility. So at this stage, no. However, there is an industry project looking at whether we could get some benefit from collecting the scan measurements on the mature cow herd.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Another question there in relation to carcass traits. Do you need to collect the carcass info at the same age for each drop of calves?
No, the answer is no. If you've got different variation, I suppose, between seasons, then no, it's not important to collect it at the same age across the different age drops. Breedplan's only going to compare the carcass information directly within animals that are born in the same calving year and of similar age. So it's really the differences in the mob that it's looking at compared to, I guess, if we've got seasonal variation and they may be in better nick one year compared to the other, etc. So the answer to that question is no.
Okay, another question there is just in relation to the scanners for scanning this carcass or live animal ultrasound scanning. How do they become accredited?
The accreditation is conducted by Performance Beef Breeders Australia, which is just a joint organisation of some of the main breed societies, as I understand it. Their accreditation is done every 3 years, so they're required to become accredited. They turn up here in Armidale, or generally in Armidale, where the course has been conducted, with their own scanning equipment, and effectively the 30 animals are run past them. They need to scan those. They scan them twice for repeatability, and then also for the those animals then go off and get killed in the abattoir. So if people, the scanners have to do that every 3 years, and it's all overseen by Performance Beef Breeders Australia. If anyone is interested in becoming accredited themselves, then they will need their own scanning equipment, and probably the person to contact is Jack Allen at ABRI. So if you ring the main ABRI reception, they'll be able to put you through to discuss it, or alternatively you can contact your SPTS TBTS technical officer and they'll give you his contact details.
Right, thanks Andrew. Another question there is asking, ultrasound scanning for marbling is limited in some breeds. Carcass data is therefore critical. Less ultrasound technology is going to be able to identify higher levels of marbling than it can currently do. Is there anything in the pipeline for live scanning of animals to identify levels of marbling higher than about 13%? But I think it might be lower than that, isn't it, Andrew? It might be about 8%.
Yes, and it's good to see we've got a few of our Wagyu friends in tonight. It is a real issue in some breeds, particularly those breeds that have got extremely low levels of marbling, plus also the higher levels such as Wagyu. As I said, the scanning technology at the moment is really limited to probably, I think, ideally between 3 and 7, but they're saying 2 to 8%. Outside of that, then it doesn't rank animals all that accurately, and so therefore you are probably looking more at the abattoir carcass information as useful information. Obviously the same issues exist with collecting that information in those breeds as they do everywhere else, so it really needs to be some fairly careful consideration given to collecting that abattoir information for it to be useful as well. What is underway at the moment is some evaluation of some scanning software that's been developed in America, which will hopefully allow identification of a greater range of marbling, or intramuscular fat. So particularly at the top end, to take that above our current limitations of our scanning software and hardware to get better information on that. I think it's really only an issue in the Wagyu breed at the moment. Certainly in our other breeds, I don't think we'll be having any problems with the scanning data. The one thing I didn't say at the time is the Brahman information, the scanning has been shown to be of limited value in showing up differences in intramuscular fat, and so there's actually no intramuscular fat EBV currently reported for the Brahman breed.
Yeah, very good. Another question there, is there any DNA testing you can do for carcass data? I guess that's probably one we're going to cover in our last session, looking at DNA information we incorporate into EBVs, but is there anything which ones that in now, Andrew? No,
I think we will cover that in the last webinar. There are DNA tests available in Australia. There's tests out of Pfizer out in Brisbane. I guess that the most use of this information, the DNA information, will be to include that into a breed plan analysis with the scanning and the ultrasound, the abattoir data, to actually come up with a combined EBV of higher accuracy. So yes, that's something we need to start to consider, and we'll discuss that in the last webinar. But if you're interested in the carcass traits, then I wouldn't just be using DNA tests to replace your actual scanning, and certainly collection of the scanning and possibly any abattoir data would be just as useful as that DNA information.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I think the last questions there really relate back to that first question we were pondering before in regards to the EMA EBVs in related back to the standard carcass weight, and do we account for differences in dressing percentages? Have you been able to think about that a bit more, Andrew, or anything you want to add?
Not really. I will say.
Think about it.
You go, Philip, sorry.
Think about it. I guess we're not really accounting for dressing percentages as such. I suppose we're just looking at that standard carcass weight and adjusting back to that, and looking at variations in those traits, and then estimating a retail beef yield from a carcass. So we don't really have anything in there, well, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but we don't really have anything in there at this stage that we can estimate genetic differences for dressing percentages, unless we're taking taking live weights on the cattle prior to slaughter and then following that through to a carcass weight.
Yeah, I think the point is here, if, as you correctly say, if we were collecting the carcass weight, dress carcass weight information and any differences in the yield there, then the EBV would be taking account of it. In practice, though, we're probably not, because that information isn't coming in, and so we're not identifying any genetic differences that exist between animals in actual dress carcass weight and the dressing percentage.
Righto, thanks Andrew. I think the last question there we have accounted for. Is it important to collect the data right on the particular recording day recommended, e.g. a month to 6 weeks later? Yeah, well, I think we've covered that fairly adequately in terms of the weight range or the age ranges that we can collect those scan information in. Is there anything else you need to add in there, Andrew?
No, I don't think so. All I'd be saying is if you're going to collect the information, then make sure you collect it at the right time and on the right animals. So this is one of those traits which there is a cost associated with collecting this data, probably a higher cost than most of our other traits. So it's important to spend some time when you're starting out with your collection of your carcass data to make sure you're getting the right information and the most bang for your buck. And if you've got any questions, then please contact your SPTS or TBTS technical officer, whoever that may be at the time, to run through that. But now that's all I've really got tonight, Philip, other than to thank everyone for their attendance, and I'll pass back to you to close up.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. Just before we wrap up, just a reminder that tonight's webinar, as well as the previous webinars, will be available for download from the SPTS and TBTS websites. If you experience any difficulties with downloading these presentations, please contact us and we can have a look at some other options to help you get a copy of that. We'll also be sending out some written resource material that will be relevant to tonight's traits that we've been discussed, and that should be with you in the next couple of days or so. Also, just a reminder that you will need to register for the next 2 webinars if you haven't already done so. So that can be done at the same place that you registered for this webinar. If we haven't been able to answer your questions tonight, or you feel you want a bit more clarification about some of the answers that we gave to them, please feel free to contact your technical officer that's responsible for your breed, which is up in your screen there now. So apart from myself looking after the 9 tropical breeds in the north, and Andrew looking after the Hereford and Murray Grey, we've got Christian Duff looking after Shorthorn, Charolais, Red Angus and Simmertail, Ashley Austin looking after Blondie Aquitaine, Devon, Red Pole, Salers and South Devon, Peter Parnell and Angus, Alex McDonald Limousin, and Michael Beattie for Wagyu. You can of course also contact the Breedplan office for assistance with any of that information. Again, on behalf of Andrew and myself, thank you for your attendance tonight, and hope that you can join us again next week to talk about the fertility and docility traits. Until then, good night.